High Commissioner. But anyway.
If you move your screen, there are a number of other screens. So, Javed, technology, my dear, technology.
I can see Her Excellency now. Hello, Excellency.
Who's the Syed Asad? Hi.
Okay, since the High Commissioner is here, before we start the meeting, I'd like to put down some housekeeping rules that we will be observing. One is we will put all of ourselves on mute. The only person who will not be on mute will be Wendy Gilmore, who will be speaking. And in the meantime, if you have any suggestions or something or comments, put them on the chat. I mean, I know there will be lots of things that will put them on the chat, but once we start with the question answer session, at that particular time, we will, be taking you on. But the thing is that we've got to keep it to questions only, specific questions, and not the comments, Sometimes it happens, and like last meeting, we did have someone who had a long comment. And so this time we will keep it to questions, and we will make sure that whatever comments that we have, we'll put them on the chat. If you have any other specific question that you want to put on the chat, you can do it and we'll be observing. So I will ask Dr. Sabia Khan to now introduce our chief guest, High Commissioner, Her Excellency Wendy Gilmore.
Assalamualaikum. Am I audible? Everybody can hear me?
Yes, you can be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Your Excellency, welcome to our program. It's a pleasure to have you amongst us. We've been waiting a long time to hear you and hear your thoughts about it. And it's my pleasure to introduce Her Excellency, Miss Wendy Gilmore, High Commissioner of Canada and Pakistan. She's been a member of the Canadian Foreign Service since 1990 with a number of postings on such as United Kingdom, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Botswana, Angola. That's a lot of countries and really diverse countries. Interesting, she served in international peace operations in Bosnia and Kosovo and been the political advisor to the Commander NATO Kosovo Force. Ms. Gilmore's also served as the Deputy Director in Eastern Europe. So I'm looking at really a wide range of countries, and I can see the exposure she's had. She served as the Deputy Director in Eastern Europe and done peacekeeping as the Director of Peace Operations, including establishment of Canada's provincial reconstruction team in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And of course, she's acted as director of the Sudan Task Force. My God, that's really, really diverse. Just put it in your mind and think about the geography we're looking at in the different countries. She was posted to Colorado Springs as the political advisor to Commander North American Aerospace Defense Command. Then moved on to rejoin the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, to become Director General, Trade and Export Controls. So ladies and gentlemen, with that diverse experience that Her Excellency brings to us, I will ask her to share her thoughts and experience with us this evening. Over to you, Ms. Wendy.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I always feel sorry for people who have to sit through sort of the recitation of my somewhat checkered past. I would say, though, that I feel myself incredibly lucky to be here in Pakistan and to have the opportunity to represent Canada here. And I'm not sure that it was a very linear route through my 30 years of foreign service and other Canadian public service experience, but it was certainly, everything is relevant to the types of things that I get to do here. Being a head of mission and representing your country abroad, I think is just one of the best jobs in the world. And the fact that I'm able to bring a little bit of the trade experience, the security experience, political diplomacy, a little bit of development experience from way back when I was in Southern Africa and elsewhere, just I think stands me in very good stead. I've wanted to come to Pakistan and to spend time here for many, many years. I think I may have told some of you before that as a kid, I grew up reading mountaineering literature and wanting to be a mountaineer. And I'm a little bit sad right at the moment, and we'll talk about the COVID situation, but I have great plans to hike to the K2 base camp and was hoping to do that this summer, but I think I'm probably going to have to postpone it until next summer. But I'll be out and exploring Pakistan to the greatest extent possible, as much as I can do so, when indeed it is safe and when the government decides that it is appropriate for tourists and for visitors to get out and about again. But I wanted to say, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me with you tonight. It's a pleasure to be here, even if I am remote all the way in Islamabad, and I think many of you, of course, are down in Karachi. I was very much hoping to be with you in person, and I would still put that out there that at the appropriate moment when we're able to travel again, I'd very much like to get down to Karachi and have the chance to see all of you. I'm sure you know we have a wonderful honorary consul in Karachi, Byram Avari, who I think I can see online. Hi, Byram. And we're just so very lucky that he is in Karachi and representing Canadian interests, especially in a time like right now when we can't travel as much as we would really like. But thank you for spending your Saturday evening, or at least part of it, with me. I was going to do, I have about half an hour, I think, and I'm going to try and keep to that so that we have as much time as possible for questions. I'm hoping everybody can hear. I don't have the best microphone in the world on this laptop, but if you can't, just wave and I'll try and speak up a little bit. But I was going to talk about sort of 4 different things, not necessarily all equally. First, sort of, COVID and adapting to the new normal, and love to hear some of your experiences as well. Talk a little bit about what's going on in Canada right now. We're all, I think, just acutely curious as to what this pandemic is doing around the world, how it impacts all of us and our interests, but also each of, my family and friends are still very much back in Canada, and so I watch with very personal interest as well. Talk a little bit about my thoughts on what's going on here in Pakistan, and then maybe I'll finish by talking about why I think the work that you do, civil society organizations like Rotary and many others, why you are performing such a critical role all the time, but particularly right now in the age of COVID. So with that, I'll try and move through fairly quickly, because I always like the opportunity to hear from other people and to have as much of a dialogue as possible. And I'm still very much, I think we're all getting used to these types of online engagements and working through remote systems. So if it's a little bit stilted on my part, I much prefer to be in a room where I can see all of you directly. So I'm trying to look through the bottom of my glasses and get the right angle on screen so I can see my computer. But it's, the last 3 months have been extraordinary. I mean, it's almost a cliche that they've been so extraordinary. I have 2 young nephews who are spending too much of their time at home watching videos, and they've gotten onto Monty Python, and one of them sent me an email this morning saying, I said, what's happening with COVID? And they came back and said, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, which was a very famous Monty Python sketch about 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But it's true. I don't think that we expected, certainly collectively, the globe did not expect the COVID pandemic to develop as it did. I recall, in fact, Aziz, I see you, Mehman, I see you online, was having dinner with you and the health minister and other eminent Rotary leaders back in January, and hearing from the Prime Minister's health advisor at that time about the steps that he was putting in place to prevent COVID from coming into Pakistan from China. And my sense at that point is that I was really confident and frankly still very encouraged by the seriousness with which Pakistan was looking at the pandemic and trying to prevent the spread of the disease, given the closeness of the economies and the dialogue, the engagement back and forth with China. But really, it seemed still, even in January and February and the beginning of March, very remote possibility that this would turn into as significant a global event as it has. You know, on a personal level, I was still on the, I think it was the 6th or 7th of March, I was booking plane tickets for a holiday to go to Europe in April around Easter, not expecting at all that 3 weeks later, international traffic would be, air traffic would be suspended. There would be on Canada's part an unprecedented global travel advisory that would advise people not to travel outside of Canada, and if they were outside of Canada, to return home. Schools closed within a couple of weeks. I think around the 21st of March in Canada, schools closed, businesses closed, workplaces changed fundamentally. Everyone was sent home to start figuring out how they were going to work on a remote basis, if indeed they could. The service sector was shuttered. And this was happening not only in Canada, in Europe. We also started to see this here in Pakistan with a significant curtailment of normal economic and social activity and engagement that truly was unprecedented. The result of all of this is that, you know, it's very interesting for those of us who look at the development prospects, not just in Pakistan, but globally. But what did this do? We've seen over the last 3 months that moving to a locked down economy, and whatever smart or not smart, and whatever form, has created and thrown up disparities in very stark relief. We have seen that modern economy, knowledge workers have a tremendous advantage when they are no longer allowed in a normal workplace. Knowledge workers, given the right equipment, can work from home. Factory workers, service sector, laborers don't have that luxury or the option. The digital divide is all the more stark now than it ever has been. The access to the internet, which is not only, you know, it's uneven in Canada between rural and urban communities, it's very uneven in Pakistan between different parts of the country in terms of, you know, is there access to broadband internet? Is there access to cellular data networks that allow people to go online and to receive data simply from their cell phones? Who has what type of electronic devices? You know, as I say, my nephew's sitting at home trying to do, and my niece trying to do their schoolwork. They are incredibly privileged. They each have their own laptop or their own iPad or their own device. The vast majority of children in Canada, in Pakistan, around the world, do not have their own laptop. There might be, if you're lucky in Pakistan, one cellular phone per household. That cellular phone may or may not even be a smartphone. It's not necessarily that the household will have internet access through DSL or any type of broadband. It's not, you know, there might be more than one child in the home. How do you manage, even if schooling is available online, to distribute that electronic device so that each child has access to it? Those of us that have the luxury, when we're told to stay at home, to be in surroundings where we can have private space, where we have outdoor and green space, have managed through these last few months so much better than the vast majority of people, certainly here in Pakistan and elsewhere, who may be large families in very small homes, who might not have access to the outdoors in a way that is safe for them to go outdoors. In Canada, the lockdown happened toward the end of March. It was really still winter. People were truly indoors and not going outside. You know, you don't go out and sitting on a lawn in -10 and snow. In Pakistan, the heat has started building through this period. It's not necessarily comfortable to be outdoors. If you're stuck inside a home and you don't have access to some type of climate-controlled system, it can be incredibly uncomfortable. And if the disparities that we know exist in society, what something like a pandemic that we've seen, a global crisis, throws all of these things into stark relief. And it really does exacerbate what is already the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And I think it places an incredible burden on developed countries like Canada, where we have resources that we can help others, but also within each society, how do we ensure that there is some measure of income redistribution, of support that goes to the poorest and the most vulnerable amongst us. The other thing that, what's the new normal with COVID? And this is something that's very near and dear to Canada's heart, because we have, and I think I've told, and spoken to many of you about this before, we have a feminist foreign policy. We have a feminist international development assistance agenda. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about what it's called the GBA, the gender-based analysis. All of our policy and programming, we try and look through a gender lens to try and understand how our policies, our engagements, our development programming impacts women and girls, perhaps in a way that's differently than it does men and boys or other type of minority situations. Sorry, I'm just gonna blow my nose for a second. And one of the things, and I've been talking to quite a few people about what the pandemic and the policy decisions that flow from the pandemic have meant in terms of women and girls here in Pakistan, but frankly, it is relevant in Canada and in around the world. We all know that women perform a significantly disproportionate amount of unpaid labor in the household. Women bear the brunt of childcare, of domestic support, of cooking, of cleaning, of the emotional burden for the household. That didn't change when people were sent home from the workplace. You can say anecdotally, I have friends where there are a working couple, both the husband and wife have responsible professional positions, and I have been told that the husband disappears into an office in the morning in his home and works all day and emerges again at the end of the day without having really given thought to the woman who is trying to work, who has the kids coming and saying, what do I do now? How do I get online? What am I supposed to do for my studies if they're old enough? If they're toddlers and babies, good luck to you. There is no way that you can carry on a professional responsibility if you are trying to look after a toddler at the same time. If you're in a particular socioeconomic bracket where you are able to have household help, that's great. But also during the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people, because of safety-related concerns and the need to try and isolate your families, the domestic help haven't been available. So even when that might have been an option, it's even less available given the current circumstances. It's also interesting that in the current environment, the women focused or women heavy professions have been disproportionately impacted. So the service sector, which certainly in Canada has a high component of women's participation, has been more affected than have other areas. There are a lot of female healthcare workers who have been tremendously impacted by the fact that childcare may not have been available at the time that they are being asked to put, frankly, their lives on the line to go and to deliver frontline healthcare services. Men also, of course, have been working in the frontline healthcare services, but as I said right at the start, they don't often have that additional burden of being the primary caregivers for children in the house. Education sector is disproportionately staffed by women, by teachers. And it's these types of people-to-people contact sectors that have been impacted by the virus more so than, in some cases, even where straight manufacturing has been able to continue, as I say, knowledge-based or labor and so forth, where particular provisions have been made. It's the service sectors, and in particular the women-dominated service sectors, that have received less attention. And I am struck, and we're very lucky in Canada. We have a gender-balanced federal cabinet. That's not the same in every country of the world. I think the Scandinavians have a few more. I have told members of the government here, who are probably a little bit tired of listening to me come and say, but Every time a picture comes on Twitter of the National Command and Operations Center or of the federal cabinet, or even of some of the provincial cabinets, I look around the table, I look at these pictures that appear, and there are few, if any, women at the table participating in decision making. And having disparate voices make decisions, especially in crises, means that you will have better responses. That means women should be at the table. Minority communities should be at the table. That's ethnic minorities, religious minorities. The transgender community in Pakistan is being particularly impacted right now. All of these voices need to be heard so that when policy decisions are made, we can understand exactly what the impact will be on them. And I think it's a great leap of faith for any of us to assume that we can speak for every community. There's been, it's been fascinating and incredibly disturbing to watch the degree of racism which has emerged in North America. I would say the United States has, of course, been the flashpoint for it, but we're not immune in Canada. And we're now very acutely looking around our decision-making tables, even in the Canadian Foreign Service, to say, all right, are we truly representative of Canada? Do we have the right voices? Do we have a full sense of what the impact is of the types of work we're doing on every community? And I think it really does behoove all of us to constantly have that in the top of our mind. And unfortunately, what we've seen and is acutely disturbing is that in the current environment, where we have families segregated in their houses from one another, we are seeing a significant rise in gender and sexual-based violence. And the access to the services that would normally be available, even when those services are running fully, has been curtailed. And many of, the disproportionate impact is, of course, on women, sometimes on children, and children's ability, women's ability to access healthcare services has been constrained, to access the police and security services remains very problematic, to access the shelters that are necessary, given the need to isolate and to quarantine as a result of the virus, have all been very challenging. So I think it really does put the onus on all of us, wherever we sit, whatever sector of the economy, of society we're sitting in, to think about these issues and to figure out a way that we can address them in a way that means that people are not being left behind even more than they were previous to the beginning of the pandemic. So that's, I'm speaking on, so I'm going to go through a few other things. So I was going to say a little bit about what's going on in Canada, and I've spoken sort of, we talked about some of the challenges that we're seeing, like everywhere, but with respect specifically to COVID and the virus, what is fascinating to me is that the Canadian government acted quite early on. I mean, as I started with, the 21st of March, this global travel advisory came into place. This is the first time that the Canadian government has ever issued such advisory, basically telling Canadian citizens, get home while commercial means are available. Don't leave Canada when you are there, because you cannot guarantee the ability to get back. And this had a huge impact on my High Commission. And Byram knows this very well. We've been working really hard to try and assist the repatriation of Canadians from Pakistan. Over the course between 2nd of April and the 14th of June, I think it was, we had 21 facilitated direct flights to Canada. About 6,500 Canadians and permanent residents were able to travel back to Canada during that period. And we facilitated, I think there was now about 1,200 emergency financial assistance packages to Canadians so that they could avail themselves of those flights. But it was a tremendous move of people. Well over 60,000 Canadians returned home in the first 3 weeks of April, last week of March, first 2 weeks of April alone. Huge movements of people. In Canada, like Pakistan, we're a federal country. We have 10 provincial governments, all with their own very strong views of how to manage a situation like this. We have the federal government, which has certain areas of jurisdiction, of which health is not one, but has an overall responsibility to try and coordinate. And there was an effort to ensure what we would call a whole of government collaboration on health, safety, and security right up front. And also to put, and this is something in Canada we pride ourselves on, to put evidence-based decision-making at the forefront of all of the policy initiatives that were taken. Some more successful than others, but certainly the government moved very swiftly to put certain economic packages in place to address some of the more disadvantaged. Over $1.5 billion, of which 50% was in transfer payments to the provinces, and support for businesses, for individuals, for different segments, seniors, students, and others. So it was really unprecedented. We've just had an economic update delivered in our parliament in a somewhat remote format. And Canada is now seeing a higher debt to GDP ratio than we have seen since the Second World War. And there's a lot of worry around that. Like Pakistan, no government wants to take on significant amounts of debt, particularly when growth, at least in the short term, is not assured. But this is deemed to be necessary to keep as much as possible the economy functioning while we get a better sense of what and how long the pandemic will last. Just a little bit on the stats front, we have, because everybody always asks me, how many cases do you have in Canada? So as of today, there are 107,000 known cases, and we have had an unfortunate 8,750 deaths. Now, more than 3.1 million tests have been conducted so far, and the Canadian government has the capacity now to do systemic testing. So we're trying to do what are called serological studies and others to get a sense of how widely the virus has spread in the Canadian population. But what the good news is, and there is some good news, is that it is absolutely clear from the data available that the curve has flattened in Canada. I don't know why our public health leader, Dr. Theresa Tam, who is spectacular, she keeps talking about planking the curve. And I think she's talking about, the exercise you do when you straighten your body. It's all been, so all of the discussion in Canada has been about planking the curve. But we have at the moment, excuse me, about 370 cases per day that are now discovered. And that's down from a height of about a month and a half ago of well over 2,000 cases per day. Each province has established its own reopening plan. So Ontario is at a different phase than British Columbia and so forth. And every province, the plan is that everybody's working on a 2-week planning horizon, understanding that you don't really understand the data of the epidemiological curve other than in a 14-day curve. So one day's data doesn't really mean something, but a couple of weeks of data indicate where indeed the infection is coming down. Which is interesting because then we look at Pakistan. So it's sort of my view of what's going on here in Pakistan. And as you can imagine, I think we all, each and every one of us, have been watching really closely what is happening here and being a little bit perplexed by what is happening with the virus in Pakistan. I mean, in Canada, we have a population of about 36 million people. And as I said, 107,000 cases. Pakistan population of, as they say, about 225 million people or more, and 165,000 known cases. And that piece of data is a direct relationship to the amount of testing that's done, because those are confirmed cases. Of that, in Canada, we've got, let's say, trending toward 9,000 deaths. Pakistan, thus far, only 3,229 deaths. That's, even if it is off by a factor of 10 to 15%, that's actually something, while each and every death is tragic, but that's a positive development. Somehow, it does seem that mortality rates in Pakistan and in elsewhere in South Asia are not the same as we have seen in Northwest Europe, Southern Europe, and in North America. My own sense of that is that a huge piece of that is demographic. Somebody told me that in Italy, 28% of the population was over 65 years of age. In Pakistan, it's about 4.5%. So there is obviously, and we've seen in the data available thus far, that this disease impacts the elderly and those with underlying health conditions more than it does younger, healthier populations. But even still, it's clear that, or it seems to be clear based on the data available to us, that Pakistan's mortality rate has not been as bad as people initially expected. But it's interesting to compare to the region because, Pakistan exists in the South Asia region. India at the moment has reported about 565 cases per million head of population. Bangladesh is coming in at about 1,000 cases per million head of population. Sri Lanka, much, much lower, only 100 cases per million head of population. Pakistan is akin to about where Bangladesh is at the moment, about 1,090 cases per million head of population, which is, though, the highest reported in the region. Of the death rate, it ranges from India at the moment is about 16 people have died per million head of population, whereas in Pakistan, 23 million per head of population. It is, though, and I think it's fascinating since the pandemic started, everybody is now styling themselves some type of an epidemiological expert. I try not to be, but I do talk to people who are. And there are some elements in Pakistan that are very hopeful. The last couple of weeks, while the data is still unclear, it does look like the trend of infection is going down everywhere, unfortunately, especially for your group, except for Karachi and Sindh province. The load on hospitals has gone down, except in major centers, particularly in tertiary care centers. The infection rate of healthcare workers has come down from where it was about 2 to 3 weeks ago, particularly in the few weeks after Eid. Let's hope that continues. But what is clear is that the choices available to the Pakistan government and the type of support that donor countries like Canada are trying to offer is trying to be evidence-driven. It's trying to understand sort of the balance, the trade-offs that have to be made between public health decisions and economic decisions. And any public health expert would tell you there is no trade-off. The health aspects will always trump all others because of the resulting, the disproportionate impact that health has on every other aspect of society and the economy. But it is clear that there are certain immediate decisions that relate to food security, health outcomes, overall economic prosperity, the prospects for growth, that are much more difficult for a country like Pakistan than it would be for a country like Canada. But I wanted to say, and I'll stop in just a moment and go to questions, but there's a couple of things that I am so very proud, frankly, of Pakistan, and so very proud of organizations like Rotary, because of the work that you have been doing over the course of the last number of years. Pakistan is in a better place to respond to the pandemic than perhaps others. And it stems from perhaps what could be perceived as a negative. The fact that polio has not been eradicated in Pakistan meant that there was an active and ongoing polio surveillance system in Pakistan. That polio surveillance system has been retooled to respond to COVID. And there has been some tremendous work done by Dr. Rana and his team in the National Coordination Center to use the surveillance systems that are available to track polio to then track COVID. And what I think those of us that follow the health system, and I know, those of you in Rotary as well, I believe that we're all very hopeful that one of the things that could come out of this very difficult time is the establishment of a broader integrated disease surveillance system for Pakistan, so that it's not just polio that's being looked at, it's also influenza, other infectious diseases, basic health outcomes that will then feed the development of a more effective public health care system here. I know that, that Dr. Mirza, the Prime Minister's Advisor for Health, who is himself a public health expert, is thinking along these lines, is thinking along, how do you take crisis and create opportunity of it? But we are, I think, collectively, those of us that have been in the donor community supporting the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, organizations like Rotary, who have been performing a leadership role like no other on the polio campaign, have set a lot of what is the Pakistan COVID response system up for success. My understanding is that the current polio eradication campaign is surveilling over 10,000, almost 11,000 public and private healthcare facilities, that there are well over 25,000 polio surveillance experts and the polio campaign workers out in the communities that are supporting the messaging around social distancing, around the need for sanitation, the masks, as well as trying to track the progress of this disease. So I commend absolutely commend Rotary for your continued leadership in this respect. Generally, healthcare workers in Pakistan, especially given the challenges of infection control, the access to the right equipment to manage infection control measures, have been the heroes of the last 3 months or so. And it is, they really do need our ongoing and continued support. I won't go into sort of, Canada has done certain things. We've put some money into the World Health Organization specific to Pakistan. We've made some fairly significant, I think, pledges over the course of the last month or so, including to the Global Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, of $600 million. We've put another almost $50 million into the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, and I am doing my damnedest, if you'll excuse the language, to try and make sure that those funds come to Pakistan as well. But it is an ongoing and critical effort that we all have to keep an eye on. So the last thing I would say is sort of just again, civil society organizations like Rotary perform, in my view, a critical task. You are philanthropic. You are directing attention to the most needy areas of society. You are supporting public health, and Rotary has a storied history in doing so. You are advocating for some of these issues with government, which is, I think, the most important role that civil society can play. You are holding government to account, and it's something that is needed more than ever, as we've seen governance mechanisms shift from, parliaments no longer have the direct access to decision makers, perhaps, than they once did because of the need for remote access and others. The role performed by civil society, by the media, by all of our tracking on, sorry, I'm turning off my phone. The tracking that we do of these issues for all of our governments becomes all the more crucial. So with that, I will stop talking. I'm really looking forward to, hopefully we have time to take some questions, and thank you very much again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That was very, very elaborate, and the number of things that you outlined, which makes me wonder, God, the civil society has so much to do. You point out there are so many avenues and so many facets, that you went into. And of course, as a developing country, Pakistan is looking into it, but something like gender issue, which you brought up, and being a female, that's really very close to my heart. And yes, there is so much that needs to be done. Thank you very much, and also in some way encouraging us and complimenting us on the health sector, that is the health workers. I'm a medical doctor, and for that reason, that's something which has really touched me. Yes, I know we could have done better. I feel that we started off very well in the beginning, but somewhere along the line, something happened. I think Eid happened, and well, I don't know how the euphoria got, and that is what happened. But never mind. I think, Baram, you want to say something?
Before the question and answers, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
No, before the question and answers, I'd just like to say something.
Yes, go on.
Today is a very special day. It is Wendy's birthday.
Ah!
So I want you all to wish Wendy a very happy birthday. And then you can continue.
Okay, a very, very happy birthday to you, Your Excellency. A very, very happy birthday. Many happy returns of the day, and in happier times. So with that, I'd like to throw the floor open for question and answers. There are so many questions that can pop up at the moment. Over to all of you. So when you want to ask a question, let it be a brief question, and unmute yourself. Okay, thank you.
Hello, Sabiha, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go on, Javed.
Thank you. High Commissioner, thank you very much for a comprehensive and very informative survey. With reference to the remarkable contrast between how a certain southern neighbor of Canada is handling this crisis and how your country is handling it, would you kindly also tell us what are the historical factors that you think make Canada so different from its southern neighbor, not just currently, but historically?
Thanks very much, Javed. I don't know, Dr. Khan, do you want me to take a few questions before I come back in, or how would you like to
No,
do
no,
this?
you go on. You go on. You're on. They'll just keep popping the questions at you. Go on.
Okay. So, Javed, thank you very much. I mean, it's we in Canada are watching very closely what's going on in the United States. As you can imagine, our economies are inextricably linked. We share the longest undefended border in the world. There is over $1 billion of trade that goes back and forth across the Canada-US border. And one of the things that's happened in this this particular time that is, again, unprecedented, becomes almost a cliche, is that the border has been closed for all discretionary travel. That is not something which has happened in my lifetime, other than for about 24 hours after 9/11. And it's tremendously difficult. There's all sorts of factors. I mean, there's current factors which relate to our approach to public policy and management, and the degree to which the Canadian polity is just fundamentally different from the US. I mean, one of our standard responses to the historical differences we cite all the time is that while the US Constitution has as its premise the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is a very individualist approach. In Canada, our Constitution, right from 1867, which was the Act of Dominion when we became an independent country from Britain, our founding principle is peace, order, and good government. So we prioritize I mean, I have to be careful, sort of, I wouldn't describe everybody in the US as completely individualistic, but we prioritize in Canada a collective action for the good and trying to preserve our fundamental freedoms, but understanding that requires things like, and in Canada, we're very proud of the fact that we have universal public health care, that we have a very high percentage of the Canadian public who are taxpayers. In fact, the people who are not taxpayers are the exceptions, and that we prioritize the delivery of public services. That is not to say that we are immune from, as I said earlier, from some of the things like racial inequality and disparities, and the disparities of income and wealth. But we have means to address them that are not necessarily prioritized by either American administrations or by many state governments or sub-federal entities. We are lucky in Canada, I don't know if that's the right word. We do not have the history of slavery that there is in the United States, but that is not to say that we have not the same sort of persistent racialized approach to some public policy aspects that we have to address. But it's a much more open dialogue, I think, in Canada, and I would hope a more productive one. But it is very disturbing for Canadians to watch what is going on in the US right now. We work with every level of government in the States. Before I came here, as one of my previous jobs, I was doing trade policy, export controls and others, and I was directly involved in the negotiation of the update of the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And our strategy at the time was to work with our friends and allies in other levels of government in the US who understood the value of the Canada-US trading relationship to try and ensure that all of our interests were reflected in the ultimate outcome. But on a very flippant note, I would say somebody sent me a joke today and said when God was looking at creating various countries, and he said, I'm going to create this country called Canada, and it will have abundant natural resources and nice people, and it will be diverse and pluralistic, and they will have public health care, and it will be wonderful. And God's friend was talking to him and said, wow, that sounds pretty perfect. God then shrugs and says, yeah, but just look what I'm going to give them for neighbors. So
Thank you. Thanks for that answer.
More questions, folks?
India, how about asking them? Amina.
Well, actually, you know, High Commissioner, I find that most Pakistanis who do migrate to Canada go to Toronto or some to Vancouver. But is there, do you think that some Canada could encourage Pakistanis to migrate to other parts of Canada by offering some incentives for that?
It's, I mean, there's lots of different programs for different regions of Canada. One of the fastest growing communities of proportionally growing communities in Canada of people of Pakistani origin is actually in Alberta, southern Alberta in particular. And there's a wonderful community in Montreal that I visited and elsewhere. So there is, I mean, absolutely, there is a concentration in Toronto, in fact, and Vancouver. Vancouver is a slightly older community in terms of the migration patterns over the course of the last number of years, well, last numbers of decades. Each province in Canada has the ability to put in place incentives to try and attract, especially because we are as many people know, a point-based system. Outside of family class immigration, we look to try and recruit people to come to Canada that have certain skills and trades and that answer to gaps in the Canadian workforce in particular. And so I know that the prairie provinces have been working very hard to attract certain skill sets, as have the Atlantic provinces, healthcare workers in particular. There's a constant and ongoing effort in Canada to try and address the foreign credentialing challenge of people that have professional qualifications and that aren't necessarily directly transportable to Canada. But yeah, I mean, it's everyone I talk to, I always extol the virtues of other parts of Canada. I'm from Eastern Ontario, so I like to disparage Toronto when I can, but it's still a pretty nice place. But it is true that the large urban centers in Canada, which Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, and the whole sort of Toronto-Niagara Peninsula corridor, Ottawa, Montreal, have a much higher percentage of new Canadians, of recent arrivals than anywhere else. And I mean, it reflects a little bit of where the job opportunities are and others. But yeah, I'd be the first person to try and encourage people to get out to other parts of Canada.
Excellency, can I have a question regarding what you just mentioned about the immigration part? I know the visa office is accepting applications for visitor visa, but the biometrics are not open, which is a prerequisite for a visitor visa. Any idea when that will open up the biometrics?
So thank you for that. I guess I'd start just before the direct question. I'd just say one of the very difficult decisions the Canadian government has had to take because of the pandemic is to curtail arrivals in Canada, to really restrict the numbers of people and who can access Canada. By law, Canadian citizens can always go to Canada. So Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and now immediate family members who are ordinarily resident in Canada are able to travel to Canada. But all other foreigners are not. If you hold a valid visitor visa, you cannot go to Canada unless you hit one of the exempt categories. There's certain categories that are exempt by way of essential workers and services and businesses, but it's a fairly narrow list. Students with an existing program who can demonstrate that their presence is required for in-lab or in-class activities are able to travel to Canada, but no one else. So yes, I realize it's very challenging at the moment that the visa application centers are not taking biometrics, but even if they were, it would not be possible to travel to Canada. We are working with the VACs, the Jerry's in Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi on an ongoing basis to judge when it may be safe to reopen. The Jerry's remain closed pretty much across the board. Different countries have slightly different arrangements, but as of this moment, there is no timeline for reopening, but it is constantly under review. We're looking at things like infection rate, community transmission, the physical setup of each of the offices, and whether or not the safety of people who visit them can be, if not assured, at least the danger can be mitigated. We're looking at things like behavior related to social distancing, wearing of masks, And so when it is safe to do so, as soon as it is safe to do so, we will be reopening those centers. Visas, Immigration Canada, IRCC, which is the Canadian government department responsible for processing of all visas, temporary residence and residency permits, have started to process again. They had stopped for a number of months. So those have now been just now starting to get up and running. So hopefully, if the trend line in Pakistan continues, as we've seen over the course of the last now sort of week to 10 days, the data has started to look better, then we will do what we can to try and get the vacs open again. But for the moment, there is no timeline.
Thank you very much.
Naveen, any question from you? Naveen, Rajiv?
I just had one question. I mean, like the US, does Canada also tax world incomes for its citizens? I mean, there are a lot of Indians who are in Canada now, Canadian citizens. So is it a world gross income taxation, or is it specific just to Canada?
So I'm not a taxation expert. I can certainly direct you to the website of the CRA, which is Canada Revenue Agency. But I mean, I can say just on a very general level, we have a very different taxation system than the United States.
All right.
If you are resident in Canada, you have to declare all of your income, but then we have double taxation agreements with different countries and so forth. If you are not a resident of Canada, you only have to declare Canadian derived income and file your taxes for income that flows from Canadian sources. But it's like, don't take tax advice from a diplomat. I would say go to the Canada Revenue Agency website and they will give you all the answer. I can direct you if you wish, but it's a very different system than the US.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, until everybody else is thinking about their questions, can I pop a question?
Certainly.
Or somebody else would like to go before me? Okay, Your Excellency, I have a question. Javed, is there? Javed,
Yes,
could you
G.
do you need to ask a question?
I did. I asked the first question.
Oh, okay. So I can maybe pop a question. Your Excellency, I have a question for you. That is, since there are so many restrictions, travel restrictions, and so many deterrents, how do you think the business community can play its role during these difficult times between Pakistan and Canada?
It sort of speaks to our getting used to the new normal where I started. It's very interesting. I mean, I think we're all struggling, especially I would say, people of a certain age like myself who are, we have come to the use of technology later in life than perhaps many young people have. And so my inclination is always to want to meet people in person and to engage with people in proximity. And I'm struggling a bit myself, I can honestly say, with how do I engage in Pakistan? How do I get out and meet people? How do I advocate for Canada without really having the opportunity to travel outside of the compound? And those of you that know me well know that I'm not one to be easily kept inside for very long periods of time. So it's a real question. I mean, I think platforms like this is a wonderful opportunity for me to have a chance to speak to all of you on a Saturday night. It's figuring out how we can use the tools available to us digitally, traditional media, social media, to try and get the messaging out. We're doing as much as we can to try and plan for when things will resume so that we're going to be ready to go with different aspects. I know one of the good things that's come out of it is the willingness of people to do video teleconferences like this mean that we can actually connect people, time zones notwithstanding, connect people in Canada to Pakistan, where previously it was like, oh, well, no, maybe I'll get to a visit in a couple of months or so. Now we're saying, well, we don't think you can visit. Why don't we have a conversation now and try and use these platforms? But it is a real struggle. I mean, I think we all have to be as creative as we possibly can to try and make sure we maintain our own social network, we maintain the contacts with one another, but in a way that it is safe to do so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellency Aziz Mehman here. Sabia?
Ji.
Hi. I just want to convey the thanks of Rotary to the Canadian government for their support every time to the polio program. You not only support it, you not only lead it, but you also match the contribution of the Canadian Rotarians. Just to inform you that on 20th of July, Pakistan is going to resume the small-scale polio NIDs, which would be targeted to the polio-derived cases, and then in August a medium and September a large scale, and hoping that COVID moves out of the way in November, December, we plan to carry out a full-scale NID. So once again, thank you very much, and it was a pleasure speaking to you as always. Thank you.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Sabia, may I ask a question? Another
Sure.
one?
Sure. Hi, Amina.
Well, Your Excellency, I wanted to ask you about educational, collaboration between Pakistan and Canada on education. I think I know that a lot of students do go there and they aspire to study in Canada. But is there any possibility of Canadian universities opening campuses in Pakistan? Of course, when things get better. I know that there's a Canadian school that has that is going to be opened in Karachi next year. So I think there is a lot of connection between the two countries. So how can we improve that?
That's interesting. I'm not aware of the Canadian school in Karachi, but it's on my list of places to come and to visit next time I'm down. That sounds wonderful.
Wonderful.
It's interesting. I mean, we've been thinking about education a lot, especially because of the Canadian government's decision a year ago, summer 2019, to extend the student direct stream visa facility for students from Pakistan, which is tremendous news. Now that really speaks to Pakistani students going to Canada. Education is now an export sector for Canada. We are looking at how to develop partnerships to export education services abroad, export curricula abroad in a way that helps develop not only Canadian educational sector, but also the educational sector of the countries that we're working in. There hasn't been a great experience, I can say, in some instances with the foreign campuses of Canadian institutions. There's been a few in the Gulf states and the Middle East, and there's been a bit of a mixed experience with them. So I think the development of partnerships, exchange programs, the student terms abroad, and in particular, one of the critical things that we're thinking about is how do we help to encourage the cross accreditation of different programs of study between like institutions, because that will facilitate, the credentialing of Pakistani students that might want to go to Canada eventually, but also in another direction. I mean, Canadian students who would want to come and spend time in Pakistan. I would love to see more Canadian students here if it is safe to do so. So there's a lot of opportunity. I've got a great education team that's both here at the High Commission and, well, actually one of whom is now back in Canada, but also a good team back in Canada. And we've been thinking through a lot of these things. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens with education this fall. As normally in Canada, the new school year would start in September. We would see hundreds of thousands of foreign students going to Canada to participate in in-class studies. And many educational institutions are not going to hold in-class studies this coming fall, particularly for those that aren't lab-based or that don't require actually hands-on learning. And we're still not quite sure, there's some thinking going on in Canada, what that means for foreign students, especially ones that would be beginning their studies. I feel terrible for kids that graduated high school in the last month or so that would be looking to start university in September their experience is probably going to be very different than all of ours. Hopefully they'll get back to in-person, because I think the social interaction is very positive. But in the short term, education is going to look very different. So one of the things that Canada has been a world leader on is the development of remotely delivered curricula and digital-based learning, in part for some of our own remote communities, but also for companies like OpenText, for example, and others. So it's one of those areas where we really have to think about what opportunity looks like in the current environment. But as for physical campuses coming here to Pakistan, I don't see that in the short term.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Amin, go ahead. Amin has a question.
Hi. One of the federal institutions that basically Canada is proud of is the Export Development Corporation that facilitates trade. Do you see any possibility of them linking up with financial institutions in Pakistan and the big five commercial banks of Canada, sort of connecting up with the institutions of Pakistan to facilitate trade and remittances between Pakistan and Canada?
So remittances, no, that's not what Export Development Corporation does at all. What EDC does is provide either guaranteed loans, sovereign guarantees, or they do concessional financing for exporters who are exporting goods and services overseas. There's a whole debate, if people are aware of EDC, of whether a country is on cover or off cover, and frankly, Pakistan has been off cover for some time. We have been working with EDC to get them the information that they need in order to make informed decisions about financial risk for transactions in Pakistan. It's an ongoing effort, and there's ongoing trade between Canada and Pakistan, particularly of agricultural commodities. Canola, pulses, others are still arriving shipload by shipload into Pakistan. And it would be great if we could assist Canadian exporters and the Pakistani importers by allowing EDC coverage. But the EDC is an arm's length institution of the Canadian government. They make their decisions on export financing based on financial and political risk. So up until the crisis, all of the indicators in Pakistan were looking very good. The government is struggling, the government here is struggling a little bit to keep the macroeconomic fundamentals strong. It is one of the great challenges in the current environment, and how the political system adapts to the new budget realities will be one of the things that EDC will be looking at moving forward. But in terms of financial transactions related to remittances, it's really about the banking system in Pakistan. And there's various pieces of legislation at the federal level that are addressing some of the long-standing challenges with respect to money laundering and terrorism financing in Pakistan that relates to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. And I'd really like to see that work continue, even given the current crisis.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sorry, follow-up questions to that, if you don't mind.
Go on.
You mentioned that, obviously, coming to Pakistan might not be very forthcoming in the near future because of COVID and other issues. Do you think EDC or the big five banks would be willing to connect up with financial institutions in Pakistan, so at least there is a flow of information on, addressing the maybe their information needs directly from the institutions, rather than the Canadian counselor, the counselor being asked to do that, to provide that information?
So each of what we call the big five, but the charter banks in Canada, they're all private institutions. There's no government ownership on them. So their decisions entirely on what they wish to do. If there's any interest on their part to learn more about Pakistan or to engage with Pakistani counterparts, we're, from the High Commission standpoint, absolutely happy to facilitate that, or vice versa, to assist. One of the things our Trade Commissioner Service does is they're in the business of making partnerships. So if there's financial institutions in Pakistan and you want access to engage with financial institutions in Canada, we can help to make those connections for sure.
Exactly. That's what I meant. So do you see that happening? I mean, do you see that happening in the near future? Would you be able to facilitate such connection?
I mean, absolutely. Our Trade Commissioner service is in great part demand driven. So there haven't been requests like that from the Canadian side. If there are from the Pakistani side, we're happy to facilitate whatever we can.
Okay. Okay. And how do we get in touch with the trade counselor?
So what I can do is send the information on the Trade Commissioner, the offices that we have here through either Dr. Khan or whatever, or Navin, or whatever is most effective. Byram, of course, has all of the contacts as well and can help can connect you up. Or you're welcome to contact me directly. We'll figure it out.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Abid Bhai, any question from you? Rajiv, anything from you? Have I lost them?
Okay.
Any more questions?
Thank you so much.
Ji,
My
Abid Bhai.
question has been answered. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, go on.
High Commissioner, just want to know whether you have had to reduce the Canada-based staff in your High Commission in the past 4 months. We read about certain embassies that had shipped away a fair number of people working in the High Commission, but we see you bravely sticking it out in our safe Pakistan. I hope it's probably safer here than back home. But tell us, how alone are you, or how well attended to are you?
I'm always very well attended. I'm quite lucky, I think, to be here. So we very early on, so I think it was around March the 23rd, 24th, the Canadian government decided for all of our missions abroad that we would repatriate staff that hit certain medical vulnerabilities. So if you were believed to be particularly vulnerable to the COVID virus by virtue of age or underlying health conditions, you were repatriated to Canada. So unfortunately for me, it meant that I lost about 10 staff, either because of their dependent had to go back and then the employee went. I'm hoping to get a few more people in this summer as we go through our normal summer rotations. But around the world, the Global Affairs Canada, which is our foreign ministry, I think there were about 1,400 people repatriated. So it wasn't obviously not just Pakistan. But we're carrying on. We have all of our various systems up and running. We still are restricting access to the High Commission, so we don't do in-person meetings except where it is absolutely essential to do so. We're delivering our consular services, so passport, citizenship services, and others remotely. We're encouraging people to mail in their applications, or better still, do them online where that facility exists. And my staff are, those of you who know our setup here in Islamabad, we're all sort of inside compounds in the diplomatic enclave. I think we're spending too much time with one another. We could stand for a little bit less, maybe. But the Canadians that are here are all still here and working, sometimes from home, sometimes from the Chancery, just like I think everybody around Pakistan. My local staff, those who have the ability because of their jobs to work from home, are doing so, and we've set them up with the various technical systems, computers to do so. We have shifts of people. I mean, every workplace is trying different things out, but we do shifts of people that are groundskeepers and our mechanical staff and others. So we're trying to do our best to reduce the risk of exposure to our staff generally, to make sure that people are as safe as possible. We're waiting for the curve to flatten, to go down, to bring more people back into the workplace. Islamabad has had a very high proportion of positive tests to tests being done, but the last week or so of data has been very positive.
Thank you. Thank you, Aikam. Incidentally, Commissioner, as a sign of how close Canada-Pakistan relations are, you and I share the same star sign. So you are welcome to wish me also a happy birthday. I want
Oh, Jahe.
you are, of course, much younger. in my early 20s at the time.
Happy birthday, Javed.
But very happy birthday to you, High Commissioner, again.
So any more questions from anyone until we can go back to Naveed Khan to conclude the meeting? Any more questions?
Okay, I have a question when I conclude the meeting.
Yes, over to you, Naveed. Now your concluding remarks, and thank you to everyone. Go on.
Your Excellency, I'm one of those people who are always looking into the thing that women break the glass ceiling. You're one of those women who have broken the glass ceiling. And many of the women that we even have today in the meeting have broken the glass ceiling. But what would be your message for the Pakistani women to do something or do the thing right so they break the glass ceiling?
It's I mean, it's a tough question because I'm not sure that I'm particularly qualified. Am I muted or am I good? I'm not particularly qualified to give advice to Pakistani women because I'm not of this society. I've grown up in a very different environment.
Yeah.
But I encourage every woman that I meet, young girls, people my age who are not so young anymore, and others, to assert yourself, take your space. Don't wait for an invitation. I really didn't like the book, but there is the book Lean In, right? You know, you like take the opportunities yourself. Don't wait to be invited. Get in there and get it done. I find that there is, you know, a lot of systemic barriers in Pakistan that are not necessarily the case in other places in Canada or elsewhere. I'd like to see men, all of those of you online, you should be our allies in creating space for your daughters, for your co-workers, for your wives, and your friends. Make sure that if you are holding an event, that it's not a male-only event, that you are creating a panel, that it's not a men-only panel. Make sure you have women voices at the table. Look at your hiring practice. Many of you in Rotary are very responsible captains of industry and other commerce. Look at your own practices in your own workplaces. Are you taking into account the different challenges that women might have in accessing the same opportunities? And it's, you know, it takes constant and conscious effort, which can be exhausting on occasion. You know, make sure that it's not just the women who are being asked to speak up on gender issues, that the men are as well. That I guess is my general advice. But I have to say, some of the most impressive, educated, articulate, activist women I have met anywhere in the world are here in Pakistan, and that gives me great hope.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, High Commissioner, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to thank Baram, who had introduced me to you at his home, and we look forward to more of such meetings. And thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
On a
And once again, a very happy birthday to Your Excellency and to Javed, both of you. Have great years ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Naveed, thanks, Abia. Thanks for inviting us. It was lovely to talk to
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
All the best. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
a
Naveed.
lot.
Thanks, Avia. That was great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Lovely
Thank you so much.
connecting with
Thank you
you
so
all.
much.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 So with that, we'll close the meeting.
We'd like to close the meeting now. And thank you very much, all of you, Iqbal, Amina, Hidayat, Javed, and everyone, my great friends who all joined. And thank you.
Thank you, Mirza. Thank you, Mirza, for joining us. Hidayat, thank you very much. Amina, and everybody else who was with us. Thank you very much. It was great having you all. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz. Khuda Hafiz. With that, we close the meeting.
Khuda Hafiz.